From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. The U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that the United States had carried out what he called a large-scale military strike against Venezuela, claiming the U.S. forces had captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro along with the First Lady Celia Flores. President Donald Trump also announced that the U.S. will take temporary control of Venezuela. China, Colombia, Cuba, and several other countries condemned the U.S. military action, saying that it seriously violates international law and Venezuela's sovereignty. Even traditional U.S. allies, including the European Union and the United Kingdom, stressed that any resolution must respect international law and the UN Charter. President Donald Trump often describes himself as a global peacemaker, but is that still the case? Why did he resort to military force, and why now? In what ways could this action violate international law? Now, to discuss all these issues and more, first of all, let's go to Caracas, the capital city of Venezuela, where Jesus Rodriguez Espinosa is standing by, joining us there. He is the editor of Tribune. Jesus, we understand it is a difficult and tense situation. It has been for the past 48 hours. There was a major strike and an even bigger blackout, a citywide blackout in Caracas. What is the latest situation there? What do you see and how do you feel?
There's a tense calm since these unprecedented strikes happened. Parts of Caracas, the part of Caracas where we are located, are in the middle of a blackout. I have reports that maybe half of Caracas and other places around the country were also affected in its electricity service by these U.S. military strikes. And there is a tense calm, if you want me to, put an adjective on that. And but people all over the day has been demonstrating support to Chavismo, to President Maduro, demanding his return, and denouncing the U.S. strikes, which are unprecedented and in violation of all international laws. But the spirit is high. It's important to say also that the Venezuelan institutions showed today a strong unity, and they have been informing us that they are in control of the government, and there is a constitutional, line of succession that is going to be has to be implemented in the coming hours.
Now, Jesus, we've seen and heard from the Vice President José Rodriguez, making a televised statement. Who is running the country right now? Because reports say that President Nicolás Maduro and the First Lady Celia Flores are already in New York. They're going to face American charge on American turf. Who is running the government right now?
The constitutional line of succession points at Vice President Delcy Rodriguez. So she is mandated by the Constitution to replace President Maduro. It's important also to say that the Constitution only established that if the absence of the president occurs before the half of the term of the presidency, general elections needs to be called in 90 days term. So that's what many analysts are envisioning that might happen in the coming hours. Maybe the Venezuelan institutions will appoint as acting president Delcy Rodriguez, and she will, by constitution, be asked to call for presidential elections. So that is the scenario.
Now, Jesus, we've heard from Donald Trump making a statement in Mar-a-Lago not so long ago. He basically says that, we will run the country, meaning the Americans will run the country of Venezuela, and that the American oil companies will flock to Venezuela. How do you feel about this statement?
Those are terrible statements, but no one can get surprised by what President Trump says. So he is bluffing. He says a lot of things, but the reality on the ground is that Venezuela and the Chavista authorities are in control of the situation, and what I told you, there certainly will be presidential elections soon, and our predictions is that Chavismo is going to win again, and that's going to put an additional stress on us, the Venezuelans, because the U.S. might, do not like the results of that presidential election.
Finally, very quickly, I mean, is there fear in Venezuela, as far as you know, that there can be more attacks coming as Trump threatened that there would?
Yes, of course. I mean, there is a lot of people in fear. There's no panic, of course, but of course there's tension. There is fear of new attacks, and some people are scared about what might happen, of course.
All right, Jesus, we understand.
But we also decided to defend our country. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add that we are also decided to defend our country. I mean, there's a national sentiment, including opposition people that are opposing what has been happening in recent months, but also what happened in recent hours. So there is a strong sovereign independent sentiment among Venezuelans at this moment.
All right, Jesus, thank you so much for this update. Please take care.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Now, for more analysis on the latest situation in Venezuela, we're joined in Shanghai by Jiang Shixue, Director of the Center for Latin American Studies at Shanghai University. In Beijing, we have Ben Norton, Editor-in-Chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. And also in Beijing, we have Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation and Chairman of Asia Narratives Substack. Now, Ben, let me go to you. You've spent years on end in Latin America. You've seen and studied and analyzed the regime change tactics and strategies by successive American governments. Tell us, why do you think Donald Trump launches this attack, and why now? And what are the motives behind?
Well, it's important to understand that the Trump administration laid its strategy out in the National Security Strategy published late in 2025. And the Trump administration essentially declared that all of the Western Hemisphere is part of the U.S. imperial sphere of influence. And in particular, it said that controlling Latin America and imposing U.S. hegemony in Latin America is a top priority of this administration. In fact, in the remarks that Trump made after attacking Venezuela and abducting its internationally recognized president, Trump invoked the Monroe Doctrine, and he referred to it as the Don Roe Doctrine. This is essentially a colonial doctrine. I mean, this is 204 years old, and Trump now says that Venezuela will be run by the United States, and U.S. companies will be exploiting Venezuelan oil. In previous remarks, Trump said that Venezuela's oil belongs to the United States because Venezuela nationalized its oil. Previously, there had been concessions made to U.S. companies. Venezuela ended those concessions and said that its own oil belongs to the people of the country. Trump says that that oil belongs to the United States. I mean, this is, the only term for this is colonialism. I mean, the U.S. is blatantly violating the sovereignty of an independent, internationally recognized country, abducting its president and trying to prosecute that president in domestic U.S. courts with domestic law. This is a violation of every basic fundamental principle of international law and the UN Charter.
I mean, even by American-owned standards, doesn't the U.S. Congress need to be involved when the United States launches an war, an offense against another country?
Well, certainly, but there's a long history of the United States launching wars without congressional approval, even though that is unconstitutional. In what's going on here, I mean, domestic law is just barely scratching the surface of the brazen attack on the UN Charter and international law. And now Trump is also threatening other countries in Latin America, including Cuba, Nicaragua, even Mexico. Trump has said he's going to carry out strikes in Mexico. And essentially what the U.S. is saying is that it believes it has the right to determine who should be the leaders of Latin American countries because it considers it part of its so-called sphere of influence. And this accusation that it has anything to do with drugs is completely laughable. I mean, experts, independent experts at the United Nations have repeatedly showed that Venezuela's role in the drug trade is absolutely minor and insignificant. There are many experts who have said that the so-called Cartel de los Soles, the Suns cartel that the US government alleges that Maduro is part of, many experts have said this cartel does not actually exist. This was fabricated by the US government in order to justify attacking Venezuela and pillaging its natural resources that belong to the people of the country.
Now, Director Jiang, let me turn to you. Donald Trump said in Mar-a-Lago in a statement last night ago that America is doing this military offensive against Venezuela because of the necessity of launching a war against narco-terrorism originating from Venezuela. How do you look at the reasons given by Washington to launch this attack? Why now?
Well, as you know, in English there is a popular saying that if you want to beat a dog, you can easily find a stick. So anti-drug trafficking is just a kind of a saying that Trump wants to make its illegal action as sounds like legal. So this kind of action is, as our colleague just now mentioned, this kind of action is totally against international law. So I have to ask myself, where is the international law? Where is the so-called United Nations? Okay, so they are silent. And as for your question, well, I would say that there are two dimensions. Political dimension since 1999, when Chavez came to power. So the South American country Venezuela has been following a foreign policy of anti-U.S. imperialism. So the U.S. is not happy about what Venezuela has been doing. And in terms of economic dimensions, as our colleague just mentioned just now, the U.S. just wants to control the oil sector. So these are the two dimensions why Trump wants to use military force against Venezuela. As the Chilean president said, well, today it's Venezuela, tomorrow any country.
Yeah, Einar, I mean, Trump is facing domestic pressure. Their domestic politics, this MAGA movement has been stuck, by some measure. How do you see what's happening right now?
Well, let's look at the timeline. When did Venezuela suddenly prop up? I mean, it's been there forever. Nothing has changed. But after the Epstein files became a real problem, all of a sudden Venezuela popped up into the forefront, talking about narco-terrorism, blowing up these boats. And as you pointed out, the MAGA movement is now fractured. You have many of the pundits who previously supported Donald Trump now in opposition to him, especially over Israel and also the Epstein files. So this is, to me, classic Trump. How do you, turn away, deflect interest from one area by creating a crisis in another? So right now, nothing is off the table. Donald Trump is facing midterm elections. The economic news is not good for the ordinary people who will be voting. It might be good for the top 0.01%, but they will not elect the next president or the next Congress.
So this is more likely to be, let's say, transactional power politics rather than, regime change, regime building. What's done by the liberals or the neocons in the early 2000s?
Well, it's transactional. He wants that oil. He thinks that if he gets Venezuela's oil, he can then go back to the American people and say, look, I've grabbed all these resources. I don't think he's going to get the reaction that he anticipates. People look at this and they say, you grabbed the president and his wife, you dragged them to New York. I think I was anticipating a decapitation strike, but using missiles the way he did in the Middle East. It was not anticipated that he would try to grab them and have a show trial. But the show trial will work to his benefit because the press will be busy covering that, and he's hoping that that will deflect from his problems with the Epstein files.
Ben, do you agree there's this element of deflecting blame, redirecting attention from the trouble, whatever trouble Trump might be in domestically, by using Venezuela, and also by not beheading the president of Venezuela and rather putting him and his wife on trial in the United States?
It's certainly a possibility, but I think there are a few other elements that we should also talk about in the larger geopolitical context, because Trump has made it clear that he wants to exploit Venezuela's oil. He says it belongs to the U.S. That's certainly a major factor. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves, but there are other issues as well. For instance, if you read the national security strategy, it makes it clear that the U.S. wants to prevent Latin America from having an independent foreign policy and cut off the region's relations with what they call non-hemispheric actors, which is another way of saying China in particular. We've seen that China has become the largest trading partner of South America. And of course, China and Venezuela had a close partnership. And the US is sending a message to all of the countries in the region saying that the US must be hegemonic in the region. According to the national security strategy, they say that they want to force all of the countries to see the US as their partner of first choice. And the US is saying that Venezuela is being punished also because not only did it have good relations with China, it also was a close partner of Russia and Iran. These are the countries that the US is trying to isolate and say that the entire region belongs to the US imperial sphere of influence. And in fact, Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator and Trump ally, even tweeted out, he said that the attack on Venezuela is also a message to China, that the US is saying that it's going to attack all of China's partners and try to treat all of these countries as vassals and say you cannot have an independent foreign policy. This is a very grave attack, not only on international law, but on the very fundamental concept of sovereignty. The United States is essentially saying it does not support the concept of sovereignty.
But there's a track record of American governments doing that, regime changes in Latin America, right? If you think about Nicaragua, Honduras, Cuba, the Bay of Pigs, going on for 50, 60, 70 years.
Absolutely. This is one of the most brazen forms of intervention we've seen in a long time, probably since the invasion of Panama. But certainly, the U.S. has militarily intervened and backed coups in almost all of the countries in Latin America. But another very important factor here is, back in the first Cold War, it was very clear that the U.S. was telling the region that these countries cannot have relations with the Soviet Union, and any left-wing leader, including democratically elected left-wing nationalists who were not communists. The U.S. claimed that they were all communists. And the rhetoric today is somewhat similar to the Cold War rhetoric. Trump says that all of these countries are supposedly in bed with China. So Trump is threatening Panama and trying to take over the Panama Canal based on the lie that China controls the Panama Canal. That is not true. But we see this kind of Cold War rhetoric is coming back, and the U.S. is replacing the Soviet Union with China and saying again that this region cannot have its own independent policy. And one other quick note here, there's another major name we haven't mentioned, which is Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is a cold warrior. He is a neoconservative war hawk. And Rubio has also dedicated his entire political career to trying to destabilize these left-wing governments in Latin America, especially Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. And it's well known, right-wing opposition forces in Venezuela, like Maria Corina Machado, who are very close to the Trump administration, they have said very openly that if they can succeed in overthrowing the Venezuelan government, their next goal is to target Nicaragua and Cuba. So the Trump administration would like to basically recreate the entire political map of all of the region and put in power pro-U.S. governments that serve Washington's interests. Again, this is just naked imperialism.
Now, Director Jiang, what do you think is the role of American military-industrial complex behind all this? Other than Marco Rubio himself as the Secretary of State, what about the weapons manufacturers, Lockheed Martin guys, General Motors, Dynamite, Lockheed Martin people? How are they profiting from all this? Because some analysts say that the United States needs to wage a war every once in a while.
Well, Latin America has been claiming that it's a zone of peace. Okay, so I don't believe that the U.S. really can wage a war in its backyard. Of course, as you said, that if there should be a war, then as the U.S. will make lots of money. So until now, I don't believe that the U.S. is able to wage a large-scale war against its neighbors in its backyard.
And then, I mean, how important is the rhetoric, the theater rather, putting President Maduro on trial in the American soil? Reportedly, he and his wife Celia Flores are already in New York City, in the detention center, facing American trial. I mean, this is quite unusual if you think about it. Hasn't happened for a while.
Yes, since 1989. And I know that in Latin America there are 33 countries, and probably only President Milei of Argentina said something favorable to this kind of military action. Other American countries criticize or even condemn the U.S. action because Latin America love peace. Okay, so this kind of U.S. military action is really destabilize the political situation and peaceful environment in Latin America, and that's not good for its region to attract foreign investment. And as our colleague mentioned just now, also China will also suffer from this kind of process.
Director Jiang, how do you see the reaction of China, other major players, as well as the United Nations? I mean, the United Nations General Secretary General, Antonio Guterres warned that the U.S. action is setting a dangerous precedent. He's deeply alarmed by this. China strongly condemned along with other countries. How do you see this international reaction?
Well, by now, I think that China's foreign ministry has issued a kind of statement. Point one, China is shocked to learn this kind of news. And secondly, China wants the U.S. to respect the UN Charter as well as the international law. Hopefully, as far as I know, Colombia has just assumed its non-permanent membership seat in the Security Council. So probably Colombia and China, along with Russia or some other countries, will call for an emergency meeting to discuss this kind of situation. So now we are going to see how the UN is going to play this kind of game. So hopefully that the whole situation will be calmed down very soon.
Now, Einar, what do you think will be the regional and global implications going forward? Do you expect there, to be more of a divide and conquer, by Trump towards Latin American countries? Is it becoming a new front of proxy wars of major power politics? What do you think?
Well, quite frankly, I think you said it earlier. Out of the 33 countries or my colleagues said earlier, out of 33 countries in Latin America, 32 have voiced outrage. This might be the moment when this is the last straw in breaking the camel's back. The Maduro government was not popular in most of South America, but they are now united to understand that once this precedent is set, none of them are safe. They have no independent ability to make policy, either domestically or internationally. They will be cut off from China, which has been the source of their growth for these many years, especially when they embraced the BRI. This is becoming, a life or death scenario. And it's a real question is whether they can come together. As far as the UN is concerned, it's a fixed game. You can take anything you want to the Security Council, but the U.S. has a veto. What are the chances it would
it's
not
eternally
veto?
Exactly.
Exactly.
In that way.
So, the real question is how does it come on? Like COP30, this was a signal to the world that if you want a better world, you're going to have to build it, because those who are responsible for creating the order post-World War II are no longer interested. They're not going to put money towards climate change. They're not going to fulfill the promises they've made about development. So it therefore is incumbent on the third world to start coming up with its own solutions. And this may be the final impetus to get them to act.
But China is walking a thin line, right? China has oil interests in Venezuela. Venezuela has been a conventional and time-honored partner, of course, along with other Latin American countries. But China is also in the phase of negotiating a trade deal with the United States, setting guardrails, for these relations, preventing it from spiraling into major power conflicts. What do you see the role of China going forward?
Well, China is confronted with the United States, which is engaged in a war. I mean, if another power came into the United States and seized Donald Trump and his wife and spirited them off somewhere else, I believe that everyone in the United States would believe that was an act of war. So if the United States is willing to go this far, for whatever reason, right, there is no ability to negotiate a trade peace when it comes to things like rare earth elements. The United States depends on those to build the very missiles that it was, and systems that it was used in Venezuela. Does it make sense for China to arm the United States with the very things that the United States intends to threaten it with? I don't think that that's possible. So China was not going to allow military uses for these rare earth elements and also critical metals. But now I'm certain that that line is set in stone. There's no point. It would be suicidal to give the U.S. the means to continue the kind of policies that are anti-everything in the world except the U.S.
Right. Now, Ben, we have 2 minutes left. What do you think will be the greater implications of this American strike on Venezuela and capture of President Nicolás Maduro?
It's a very dangerous moment. I mean, what we're seeing is a kind of reversal of the anti-colonial movements of the late 20th century. And it reminds me of the 1970s when the U.S. had something known as Operation Condor, in which the U.S. supported a series of right-wing military dictatorships all across South America. And essentially what we've seen is that the U.S. is trying to go back to this era. It does not want Latin American countries to be independent and sovereign. It wants to make sure that every country in the region obediently follows Washington. And it's part of this larger kind of Cold War mentality we see in Washington. The national security strategy says very clearly that the Trump administration wants to create an entirely new supply chain for critical minerals, including rare earths. And by the way, in addition to having oil and gas and gold, Venezuela also has critical minerals and rare earths. So this is all part of this kind of war mentality in the United States, where they want to turn all of the Western Hemisphere into what they call Fortress America and create a new supply chain and use the natural resources of the region in order to prepare for future conflict. So what will we see in the near future? I'm afraid we're going to see more U.S. attacks in other countries in Latin America. We should be very careful about U.S. attacks on Nicaragua and Cuba. And also, I think the U.S. is going to target strategic infrastructure, including the port of Shanghai in Peru, which is a major Chinese-backed port. The Trump administration has made it clear that this is just the beginning of a larger assault on the sovereignty of Latin American countries.
All right, with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Hub on CGTN. I want to thank all of our analysts for coming in and sharing their insights. That will do it for this edition of The Hub. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our news coverage continues on CGTN. Bye and take care.